Okay, so today is day 9 of the 67 steps, and today's lesson was about reading, and it's called Book a Day Diet. So he talks a bit about the importance of obviously reading. It's the whole big part of the whole course is getting information from mentors and people that are successful, and kind of downloading that information, learning from them. So he went into that in detail today. Um, he quoted Warren Buffett and Bill Gates, who said if they had one superpower, they would both choose to be the fastest reader, which means that they see the importance of that knowledge. I think Bill Gates, he said, sets aside like a week a year or something to just digest and read all the information that he's accumulated and bookmarked over the year. And Warren Buffett sets around 8 hours a day on average to just reading. So his almost half his day is taken up just reading. So obviously he can afford to do that because he's got a lot of money. He doesn't have to go to a 9 to 5 job. But obviously in that position, he still values the importance of learning. And I think that's the key to truly successful rich people, is they never stop that thirst for learning. So um, he says that Jim Rohn says the difference between a rich man and a poor man's house is a library. So that's very telling that rich people value the power of reading, whereas poor people probably don't as much, or they're reading the wrong books. And I think that you can read a lot of fiction, but it doesn't necessarily have a lot of impact on your life. If you're looking to improve your quality of life, then there's certain types of books that you want to read, and Tai talks about that a bit as well in the video. So first of all, if you think about what your blocks are to reading, why don't you read more? I think for most people it's because maybe they were forced to read really boring, horrible books in school, and so we've kind of been turned off books since then, and that happens throughout school and college, university. Is the type of education, the type of reading you're forced to do is maybe not very inspiring, and so you come away with that kind of bad taste. You just don't want to do it again. I think for me that was very true. Even though I've always enjoyed reading, I used to read a lot more fiction when I was younger. And now I read a lot less fiction just because I've got so many other books I'm interested in learning. But definitely reading really dull, dry textbooks in school is a big turn-off from wanting to read again, and I think that's true for a lot of people. And then the other myth or the other lie that I worry about is that people say too much reading means you're not spending enough time doing. So it's the lack of execution that stops people. And he says this isn't true because you'll never find anyone on their deathbed who says, I wish I'd done less reading. So I think that probably you do need to apply the concepts you learn, but you still need to make time for reading. And as far as what's too much time, it's all relative, because if someone like Warren Buffett makes 8 hours a day, then that probably tells you, you should at least give some more time to reading than you do currently. Book a day is definitely a stretch for most people, I think, because we don't have that ability to speed read. I want to share one tip that I've picked up recently, which is basically using speed reading, but it's using an application called Spritz, and Spritz is it's like a character recognition software, so it displays one word on the screen at a time, so you can read any book on an iPhone because you just need a small amount of screen space, and then it identifies the optimal character in that word to display with red. So basically the words are flashing in front of you really quick, but because your eye doesn't have to move, there's no stress on the eye, and you can just kind of easily absorb that information. And so what I've done is I managed to hack a system. Normally I read with my Kindle, so I've got all my books on Kindle because I travel a lot. And so until now I didn't know how to get those Kindle books onto this software because it's not compatible with Amazon's format, and Amazon have all those restrictions on what you can do with their content. There is a way you can download the Amazon books onto your PC, and then you use another software called Calibre. And Calibre has a DRM plugin which basically strips the digital rights from the book, and then you can convert that book into any format. So you can convert your Amazon Kindle books into the EPUB format, which is really commonly used with other applications for reading. So what I did was I turned my Kindle books into EPUB format, and then I uploaded them to my iPhone, and I used a software called ReadMe. Now ReadMe, it looks at EPUB format so it can understand and recognize them, and it uses this Spritz technology, which is the character recognition. So now I can read all my books, and I've been testing this for the last few days. This is amazing, the difference. Now I can read all my books basically super fast at 400. I'm up to 450 words a minute right now. I think it's a little bit easier with biographies. So right now I'm just reading Arnold Schwarzenegger's Total Recall biography, which is a really good book actually. But it's a bit easier to read those kind of storytelling ones that have more flow. Maybe the how-tos or the more complex books you have to read at a slightly slower pace to digest the information. But when I started, I think I started at 300. So the last few days I've just been increasing it from 300 words a minute up to now I'm at 450. And you need to register if you want to go faster than that. The software goes all the way to 1,000 words a minute. But basically in 3-4 days I've read 40-50% of the book already. So that will get me up to a book a week. And that's quite a big book actually, Arnold's book. So if you're reading smaller books, it won't take as long. So anywhere between a few days to a week to read a book, and that's for me that's a huge increase. Before I think I get through like maybe a book a month if I'm lucky, and it has to be a really interesting book. So the problem I found was that my eyes get tired quite quickly, and so I just read for 20 minutes and then I fall asleep. Sometimes that happens, and it's also hard to concentrate. It's a really complex topic. And the other thing that happened with reading a normal book is that my eyes kind of lose the focus where I am, and sometimes I have to go back and reread things. So the mind kind of wanders a bit, and maybe that's a bit ADD. But that's a problem I think a lot of people have. Is you start reading and then you forget where you're reading, you lose your place, and you have to go back and start again. And just that constant repetition of going back and rereading, it wastes so much time that it takes you so long to scan a page. And I've been reading for years, so I don't know if that's just me or if I work with computers a lot, and then maybe this distractions. Dealing with multiple stimulus gives me ADD tendencies. I really don't know. But the cool thing is that with this software, the Spritz software, your attention is so focused because the words flash so fast you can't wander. Otherwise, you'll lose your train of thought. So you just stare straight at the screen at your iPhone or iPad, and the words flash in front of you, and you just feel like you're just downloading information into your brain. It's kind of weird to read a book like that. Like you come away thinking, oh, I know tons about this guy Arnold Schwarzenegger, but I didn't read the book the traditional way. So I just think the information comes through, and the comprehension is fine, the recall is fine. It's probably better than when I was reading a book actually, because I'm paying more attention. So that's one trick I wanted to share that I've been trying out, because since starting Tai's course I've been thinking, how can I read more and how can I read faster and get more information. There's no point reading faster if you don't get, if you don't keep the comprehension, you don't get something from it. So that's one tip I wanted to share. I'll come back to the rest of the lesson today. So he says that there's a famous expression people say, when they find something out, they say, I wish someone had told me that 10 years ago. So that's like, I wish I found out about this thing a long time ago. Could have saved a lot of time, a lot of energy, a lot of pain. And the only way you can really avoid that is by reading, because humans that can simulate the future are going to always be ahead of the ones that are doing it by trial and error. So he quoted someone who said that, but basically that the trial and error takes a lot of time and energy, and it can be fatal if you make the wrong mistake. But when you can simulate the outcome, it can be much faster and easier, so you can progress much quicker. And that books are the easiest way to simulate those outcomes, because you can imagine, you can read an entrepreneur's book, you can imagine what they went through, you can imagine the stuff and identify with maybe what your situation is, and that you can use their experience to learn much quicker than you can by trying to do it yourself and trying and failing. So that trial and error is really really important. And it's a lot easier to learn from other people's mistakes than your own, because it can set you back a lot when you make big mistakes. The other analogy he mentions is that only poor people operate alone. So if you look at successful people, they always have this team, and I think the phrase is making war with a multitude of counselors. So basically, you have this team of people around you. You could be accountants, lawyers, consultants, mentors, and these people are they're on your side. They're driving you forward faster, and it gives you much better chances of success. So if you take books, books are basically like your virtual mentors, and having that team of experts inside your head and constantly reading and absorbing new information is going to give you much higher chances of success than just trying to go through it all by yourself and making all the mistakes for yourself. So as a way of reducing your risk if you read more books, and he talks about health as an example, if you read, if you don't have your health, you have nothing, and I've kind of come to realize that. That's why I spend so much focus and attention on my health now, that if you are reading more books about health, then you're going to reduce your risk of making mistakes. And it doesn't have to be books in this sense, because a lot of good information that I've read has come from people I follow from podcasts, so like the Bulletproof Executive, biohackers like Tim Ferriss. They put out a lot of good content, not just in books but on the podcasts, on forums you can read through, you can get a lot of good advice. So I follow kind of the paleo diet and the paleo advice, and I modify that to what works for me. But you definitely, by reading, just if it's not books, then by reading, on forums, on posts from people you respect, and people that obviously you can see they have a good healthy diet and a healthy life, and take advice from them. So the other advice he says is that tomorrow's uncertain, so you don't want to waste your time reading the wrong books. You want to get through the best books first, and then he divides that into kind of three categories of books to read. So the first one is classics, and these are books that may have been around more than 50 years, because if it's been around in print more than 50 years, then that probably, it stood the test of time. There's some real value in there that you can get. So that's the first type of book to read. I don't read a lot of those books right now, but probably I will take some of the Ty's recommendations. Look at Will Durant, look at some of those older books, and see to get some of them on my reading list. The second one is how-tos. So these are maybe more contemporary books that tackle an issue. Could be, could be like for dummy books, that kind of thing. How to, they teach you certain skills. And then the other one is biographies. So there's basically books about courage from really successful people in life, and that can really be inspiring to you as well. So you have these three categories, and the way he explained it, maybe it was in this lesson or some other video I watched him explain this, is that he reads his classics in the morning, because that's like a way to clean your mind and get inspired. So he says that we're exposed to crazy amount of advertising every day, and that just to wash that all away, he starts the day with classics, which I thought is quite a good idea, quite smart. So he'll split his reading up into 3 times: the morning, and then the afternoon, and then evening. So I don't know if I want to do the same approach, but I'm probably going to try that and see. He reads the classics in the morning, and then he reads in the afternoon. He reads the how-to books, and then he might just be reading it, and then sitting or on a sofa or something, and then fall asleep after a few minutes. And that kind of napping he also finds is really useful for health. So I don't do a lot of napping, and I kind of have this problem where I think he says it too. If you sleep in too long, you wake up groggy, and then you're just groggy the rest of the day. So that's to do with the time or the cycle that your brain is in when you wake up. If it's not in the right cycle, you kind of wake up really groggy, and you're just always groggy the rest of the day. And that's why I never use the nap. But I think I'm going to try using this strategy, and then he sets his timer basically for how long he wants to nap. So if he wants to read for 20 minutes, then he wants to have a 10-20 minute nap. Then you set your alarm for 30-40 minutes ahead, and then you just start reading. And then when you get tired, naturally you just fall asleep, and then your alarm will catch you. So you don't sleep for too long, but you get that benefit of a short nap. And that's something I definitely want to try out. The other thing I read, the way you can do that is to have a coffee, because coffee takes about 20 minutes to hit your brain. So if you take a coffee and then you fall asleep or you nap, then you'll automatically wake up in 20-30 minutes, because that coffee will hit you, and so you've had just the perfect length of a short nap. And that's something I think I want to try, just experiment with that and see. I don't feel like I need to nap, but it's one of those things maybe we don't appreciate it because we're so used to living with a sleep deficit. So for years and years in corporate life, you just don't get enough sleep. You go to bed really late, get up really early, and then you just get kind of used to that. So I do notice in the morning I'm quite tired. Normally it takes a little bit of time, have to work out, have to have a green tea, and then I kind of wake up. So I think that there is definitely some extra benefits I could get from more sleep, especially because I'm working out every day. That I think it's worth trying that. So anyway, so he reads the how-tos, and he has a nap in the afternoon, and then in the evening he saves biographies. And biographies are basically those kind of really easy to read books. You don't want to read anything that's too scary, like horror, because that's going to give you funny dreams. That's what he says. I used to read a lot of Stephen King, but I also don't read it anymore, just because I don't see what the value is, and the time is so precious that I just don't have the time for that. But maybe some people like fiction, like to read. He says in the evening is the best time to read those fiction and those biographies. So I guess that means you're reading multiple books at the same time, and that's something else I've kind of had a problem to understand, because I've always read one book and read it from start to finish. And he says that there's no law that you had to finish one book from start to finish. That's just kind of something we make up. So the worst mistake you can get is to be stuck in a bad book, and that basically hurts you, because you feel like you have to finish the book, but because you don't like the book, you're getting through it very slowly. And at the same time, if you were able to just take the key points from that book, then you could move on, and you could move to another book. So the longer you're reading this book that you don't like, or you're not really getting much value from, there's opportunity cost in there, because you could be using that time to read a better book. And so he kind of explains, this is the hang up that most people have, is don't get stuck in a bad book. If you have limited time and you're trying to get through a book a day, for example, he's not reading it cover to cover in a book a day. He's just looking through, and he calls it gold mining. So this is just looking in the book for a few key points. If you just get a few key points and take that away, then you've got a lot of benefit from the book. And I guess this kind of comes down to the Pareto principle, this 20-80 thing, that 80% of the value or 80% of the knowledge is in 20% of the pages of the words. So you don't necessarily have to read the whole book. And also books, books sometimes you can skip around front to back. You don't need to read it straight in order to understand it. So he says he flicks through the book, he looks at the back, looks at the front and the jacket, and then looks for the chapters and sees what's going to be relevant for him. And the mistake that people think is that they need to finish the book, but you can always come back to the book later if something else comes up or someone else talks about a book and says, "Hey, I learned this." You can go back to that book at any time. So you don't need to finish it front to back, and that can really hurt you if you have a better opportunity that you should be reading another book that can help you more. So I think his idea of a book a day just means you're getting exposed to so many new ideas every day. Even if you're not finishing the book, you're getting exposed to so many new ideas that the value of that outweighs just skipping a few parts of the book. So I guess gold mining is one approach to reading, and that's how he gets through a book a day. And he's reading, maybe like a third of a book in each session. So the how-to in the afternoon, the biography in the evening, and the classic next morning is like altogether about a book a day. I think for me, I probably will need to practice this because I really kind of enjoy reading from start to finish. It's one of those things I do a lot of, and probably there is some opportunity cost in doing that. So I'm going to try that out. I think with speed reading as well, I'm really so happy with that boost I've had from the speed reading with the app that I want to try that out for a bit and see how that works for me. And there's, I get through a book a week. That's a massive improvement from where I was. So I'm really pleased with that. And he says it's like lifting weights; it gets easier with time. So this idea of practicing reading at the beginning, you may find it difficult to sit down and concentrate for so long. Maybe that's why he splits it up into 3 periods as well. So he doesn't sit and read for an hour. He maybe sits and read for 20 minutes, then 20 minutes, then 20 minutes in the evening, and you kind of have those very focused attention spurts. So maybe that worked better for some people than trying to read everything in one block. But it gets easier with time. So with practice, and definitely with speed reading, this is very true because when I started, 300 words a minute was a stretch, and now I'm up to 450, and that's only in a few days. So I think that your brain can adapt to that, and even traditional reading, your brain can adapt to that. So it definitely gets easier with time, and that's pretty much it for the lesson for the 6-7 steps. There was another video on one of the book reviews called The One Thing, so I took some notes on that, and I'll just go through some of the things I picked up. So the one thing is pretty much about focusing on one thing at a time, and he gives examples of Bill Gates and computers, for example, and that was all Bill Gates focused on from when he was a kid, like 13, up until 31, when he actually became a billionaire. He was just focused on that, and that was his passion. He wasn't trying lots of different things, which can distract you and pull your attention to different things. So he talks about this momentum versus end game. If you look at the end game, you don't need to try and rush for that, because ultimately the end game is death. And so you should just be worried about or looking at the momentum and keeping that momentum and that focus. And then there's these 6 lies he mentions, which is in the book. And so I'm just going to go through each of these. The first one is that the first lie is that all things matter equally, and this is called the misweighting bias. This is one of those cognitive biases he talks about. But if you think about all the things you're thinking about, in the morning and throughout your day, how many of those things are actually going to affect you in 10, 20, 30 years? And he says that most of us are majoring in minors, which means our mind is just consumed with really petty things that are not actually that important. And if we were able to, that's an opportunity cost because it's taking up your time. If we were able to focus on what is really, really key, and that's your most valuable asset, or your signature strength, as he calls it, and that's how you give your attention and focus to the really important things. So this one lie is your brain is always playing tricks on you that all things matter equally, and you're always thinking about really, really simple things. I don't think you can escape that completely, but you probably can try and eliminate it by splitting up your day. So he talks about this. This second lie is that multitasking is good or it's beneficial, and he says there's tons of IQ studies that have been done showing it's less efficient, where they put a team of people in a room, 2 teams, one has got a higher IQ, but they're told to multitask on a series of tasks. And then they put a slightly lower IQ set of people in another room, but they're allowed to just focus, and they always outperform the higher IQ people. So the act of multitasking, I think, your brain can only run in serial, it can't run in parallel. So every time you think you're multitasking, you're actually just switching your attention. And I've read about this before, that it causes you to be less efficient. I'm very guilty of this when I'm on a computer, because I've got 100 things I want to do, and I'm always switching between browsers, and I think maybe that's definitely one habit I need to explore. So if you've got 100 browser tabs open, you're probably guilty of that as well. But anyway, so coming back to these lies, you need to ask yourself, what can you be doing to move you more efficiently to your goal? So not just in how you're thinking, but in how you split your day up. And he says that you're never going to be able to escape those chores. So there's a certain number of things you have to do every day. Like maybe you have to cook, maybe you have to do the dishes, maybe you have to milk the cow, whatever it is. You have a certain number of activities that have to happen every day. I think you probably can outsource some of that if if you're doing well in your business, you can outsource some of the mundane stuff. But you still have some things like you have to do. You have to shower. You have to work out. You have to do those things. Those are chores. You can't outsource working out. So there's always going to be some chores in your life. But if you can try and make that 20% of your waking time and spend the other 80% on what is your primary focus, your signature strength, then that will give you a massive boost in terms of the results you see and just working towards your goals. So maybe 2 to 4 hours is 20% of your day. You spend that doing the multitasking, working on your weaknesses, all the things you have to do that you can't outsource. And then 80% is where you spend on a primary focus. So what he does, which I used to do, is also write down 3 things you want to get done that day, and then circle the most important thing. So I did this for a while, and I stopped doing it when I started traveling, and it's just one of those habits I fell out of. So I'm definitely gonna get back into that. I usually do that after meditating because I find that's when I have a very clear focus and I'm able to think about the day, what I want to get done that day. So it's something you set your intention at the start of the day, and it just helps your brain to stay more focused on what's the real task, what's the primary focus, and you don't get distracted so easily because you have this in front of you. So you have your three things to do. If you just get those 3 things done today, then you've got a lot of momentum towards your primary focus or what your goal is. So having those 3 things helps to sharpen your attention. Then he circles 1, which is the most important. So if he just gets that done, he's happy. He's happy with that. So basically, the theory is you can't eliminate multitasking. It's always going to be around, but you can cut it down. So think about what is your signature strength, and how can you devote more time to that, and how can you, bundle these chores you have to do into maybe one part of the day, so it's not breaking up your day all the time and breaking up your focus. Then the third lie, he says, this disciplined life. So people think they can't get the success they want because they're not disciplined enough. He thinks that's maybe the wrong way to look at it, or it's just a misunderstanding of the issue. And the example he gives is the Rock. So the Rock, the wrestler who's now an actor, he gets up at the gym every day, go at 4 a.m. He goes to the gym for 2 hours because his livelihood depends on him having muscles, so he has to do that. And then he goes to the set afterwards to shoot what he's working on in the movies from maybe 6, 7 a.m. So he's saying we might look at him and think he's disciplined because he does that religiously, but really all he has to do is those 2 things. He doesn't do a lot of other things. He's spending his entire attention and energy on those 2 things, and because he's so focused, he doesn't need the discipline. That's all he's got to worry about. That's all he's got to do. He's probably outsourced all the chores he doesn't want to do, like cleaning his house and stuff, which definitely helps. But basically the theory is if you have fewer things to do, you're naturally going to be more focused. It's not about beating yourself up for not being disciplined enough. It's about looking where is your focus supposed to be and clearing as much out as you can that's taking away time from your focus. And then it's easy to be disciplined because you don't have lots of things competing for your attention. So this is the second or the third lie, about needing it to be disciplined to have success. I think you need some discipline, but if you have fewer distractions and more focus and try and remove the rest of clutter from your life, from your day. If obviously you have kids and stuff, then you have to balance that. If you have other demands, then you need to just prioritize it effectively to leave enough time for your primary focus. That's the key. The fourth one is quite funny. I've read a lot about this. It's willpower. So you need willpower to succeed. And willpower, he says, has a genetic component, which is interesting because I didn't know about that. I'm not sure what I think. I need to research that more. They did this study with donuts with kids, and it predicted their later success in life if they were able to resist the temptation of eating a donut. The adult leaves the donut on the table, walks out, tells the kid not to eat it, and the ones that eat the donut, they had less willpower, and that's a predictor of their greater success in later life. So the ones that were able to resist the donut have more, willpower, and they're able to apply that in their life. And then there's another one which is funny. It's this cookies versus broccoli study. So they're doing a fake kind of test where the person doesn't even know where they're in the test, and it's like they set 2 people down. One set of people is in a room with a table of cookies, the other one with a table of broccoli, and so they ask the people not to eat the snacks, and they don't know they're being tested at this point. They just think they're waiting while they go, waiting before the real study. So they found out that the people who resisted the cookies were more likely to steal money. What they did, after they sat in the table with the cookies, they go into another room, and then the the scientist or whatever leaves money on the table, goes out, the people that were resisting the cookies had used up all their willpower, and they were more likely to take that money and steal that money because they'd already used up that willpower. So this kind of shows that willpower is finite every day, and it's going to go down from the start of the day. So for me, that just means don't expose yourself to unnecessary temptations that are going to use up all your willpower, because it's just gonna make it harder to do everything else. For me, I want to make sure I have good food in the house, and if it's bad food in the house, it's going to mess with your willpower, and it's going to affect you. At least for me, that's how it is. So if you think about willpower being finite, then the strongest part of your day, where you have the most discipline, is going to be in the morning when you have the most willpower, and then it gets used up through the day. So you should tackle the hardest thing you need to do in the morning when you have the most willpower, because it's going to be much harder to do it later in the day. So you think about that, that's going to be different for everyone. But let's say you're trying to get healthier or in shape, then it takes a lot of willpower for you to go to work out. If you leave your workout to the end of the day, when your willpower is always used up from other things, it's going to be much harder to maintain that consistent discipline, if you want to call it discipline, that consistent willpower to hit the gym. So for me, meditation is one of the things that I really enjoy, but sometimes it's easy to get distracted, and you get an email, you check your mail, someone's talking to you, you forget to do it. I find the best time of the day is to do it in the beginning of the day, because A, there's no distractions, B, my mind's not racing with thoughts straight away. The first thing I get out of bed and I do is make sure I meditate, and then that's great, that sets intention for the rest of the day. So don't expose yourself to necessary temptations, and try and tackle the thing that's hardest for you first thing of the day when you've got the most willpower. I think that's a huge takeaway. If you just get one thing, then that's massively going to help you hit your goals and do the things that are hard in life. Probably the other thing I should be doing is making more sales calls, because that's one of the other things I find it hardest to do in my business. So instead of waiting until the afternoon or evening when my willpower is already used up, it's just to try and tackle that first thing in the morning. And I think if you get a lot of things done at the beginning of the day as well, you feel a lot better. So this is the tricky part, which a lot of people say you need to get up at 5 a.m. You read lots of successful people, and they all get up at really early, and then some people get up really late, and they don't have a really doesn't seem to be something people agree on. So I've always wanted to be one of those people that says, I'm going to get up at 5 a.m. and I'm going to get the things done, important stuff done in the beginning of the day. But I end up staying very late at night reading sometimes. So you have to find a balance that works for you. But either way, whenever you wake up, that's the time to do the most important things and the hardest things to tackle, because that's when your willpower is the highest. So that's for willpower. The fifth lie is this thing about having a balanced life. So you need to find a balanced life. And he says that people who achieve great things don't usually have a balanced life. If you look at them, what they do is they can compensate by building a team around them that has that balance. So you find people and partners who round out your imbalances, and they let you focus on what you are really good at. So you may have real focus on one of those pillars, like health, wealth, love, or happiness, and the other three maybe you don't give enough time and attention to. But if you have people around you who are focused on those, that can help you bring you back into balance, and they provide that balance in your life. So obviously there's no really fixed rules, and so you just need to experiment and see what works for you. I think that you definitely need to make time for exercise. There's some things you have to do to feel good. If you don't have that, you won't be happy. It's like he says, if you don't have your wealth, you can have wealth, love, and happiness. If you don't have your health, you're missing one of the pillars. You are not going to be happy. You're not going to get the good life. So you definitely can't ignore one thing completely, but you need to make sure that you're not so worried about always dividing your time between things that maybe aren't equally important to you, and that you will go through phases of maybe spending more time on one area. So if you're launching a new book or a product, you're probably going to be super focused on hustling on your business, and the other things are not going to be as important to you. You're not going to spend as much time on those every day, and that's natural to go through these phases. So you're not going to have a perfectly balanced life every day where you split it up, 20-20-20-20 into all the areas you want to do. It's going to be phases of really focusing, and then maybe having a break and taking some time off. It's definitely true for me. I think that I cannot split my time up so much. I need to be very focused on one thing at a time. And that can go on for days and weeks sometimes, but every day I make time to meditate and exercise, because those are two things that just make me more productive. So I'll do that regardless, because that's going to give me more over the rest of my day than I would have if I didn't do it. And then he says, if your life feels chaotic, you try and embrace the chaos, so you will adapt to that. So one thing might be you maybe check your email less often, or you work out at home instead of going to the gym to make time for what your primary focus is. So obviously we all have a limit of how much stuff we can deal with every day, but if you're feeling chaos, then just try and adapt to it and try and embrace it. As long as you're making time for your primary focus, you will find maybe other distractions fall away. Things that you habits you had that you thought were important maybe were not as key, so you don't need to check your email as often maybe, and you'll still survive. So I haven't reached that level of chaos yet, but that's definitely something I'll think about if that happens. I think when I was doing my corporate job and starting my business, together, that was a very chaotic time, and I just had to adapt to that. So maybe I went out less with my friends. I probably didn't exercise as much then, and now I have that time again where I can do that. So you have these phases, and you never hit that perfectly balanced life, all in one day. And then the last lie he mentions is that big is bad. So people say that, I don't know who says this, but that going for something big is bad because maybe you're tackling something too big and you're going to fail. He says that if you fear success, you're going to either avoid it or sabotage yourself from getting it. And that, I think that's very true. I think you have to aim something that you believe is possible, because if it's out of your reach, then you're just going to be too scared of it and you won't go for it. So I think that you shouldn't be scared to aim big, but you need to chunk that down into what's reasonable. And again, that comes down to this 18-month goal. Setting a goal 18 months out. I think Vishen Lakhiani says that we underestimate what we can achieve in 3 years. So set the goal that's within 18 months to 3 years away, and work towards that, and then break down what you need to do to get there within the 18 months. But just don't start off too big and too fuzzy, because otherwise it's going to be too overwhelming and you'll never tackle it. You'll have that paralysis or that fear that will stop you from even getting started. So he says that people talk about successful people, they'll always talk them down a bit, and that's to make themselves feel better, so they don't have to look at their own flaws. And that's very common. You bring up a really successful person like maybe Bill Gates, and everyone start muttering, "Oh, he was lucky," or whatever he did that they didn't like. They'll try and bring a person down because it stops them having to think hard about their own mistakes and their own flaws, and why aren't they doing more with their lives. So be careful about who you hang around with, who you talk with. If you see that's a pattern, those are probably people you don't want to spend as much time around. If they're really going to try and pull you down when you become successful, then why would you spend time with those people? And then the last point I've written down here is that you have to give it all in one area with a narrow focus. So sometimes people want to do multiple things, but if you look at successful people that have achieved a lot of things, they usually do that one at a time. So you take Richard Branson as an example. He's got tons and tons of businesses, but he didn't start them all at once, because that's crazy. How are you gonna succeed in all those areas at once? But once you penetrate and dominate your niche, whatever that is, and then you can have success in that, then you can expand. Then you can look for the next thing and look to do more. But you need to always make sure you're focused on one thing and have quite a narrow focus until you have achieved some success in that area. That then gives you the time or whatever, the money again to reinvest and look at another area. So big isn't bad. You just need to know how to chunk it up and how to frame it in your mind so it's doable, and that you have the belief and the confidence to get started with just something. So those are our lessons from today. I'll be back tomorrow with more.